Hi guys, and welcome back to my course. In this video, we will learn all about exports and imports. There are two ways you can export a module: default export and named export. You should use default export when you want to export only one module from a file. In other words, a file cannot have multiple default exports. And when you're working with default exports, you can import the module by any name you like. You use the named exports when you want to export multiple modules from the same file. Earlier, we saw how to default export a component, and we tried importing it with the same name. Now let's try importing it with a different name. So we created this component, blog card, and we used the default export to export it. And we imported it here in app.js by the same name. So let's change it. Let's say blog item. Now we need to refactor our code because we're using blog card here. So let's change this. Say blog item. Let's save it. And as you can see, our code still works. Similarly, if we change it again to say something else, let's say blog homepage card, and you use the same name here, let's save it. And as you can see, everything's working fine. So when you're working with default exports, you can import it with any name you like. But you cannot change the name in the relative part because this blog card is the file name and this name is the module name. So just keep that small thing in mind. Now let's say we have a utility file where we keep all our helper methods. So let's create a new file. So let's say utils.js. Let's say this file has a method which checks whether an array is empty or not. So let's say is array empty. So this function, it accepts an array, checks if array is not undefined, checks if this array is not null, and this array dot length is greater than 0. Sorry, spelling mistake. So if all these conditions are true, that means the array is not empty and you can return true, or else you can return false. Let's say this file has another method which prints the logs and sends a copy of those logs to a tool where you can track the production logs. So let's say constant, say dump logs. Say this function accepts a message, prints it for you, and sends it to a tool for tracking. So basically, when you deploy this application live, and if your user faces some issue and you've logged it, so you would want to know about that issue. So that's why you send these logs to a tool or a backend where you track these logs. Okay, so we've got two methods in this file, and to make them accessible in other files, we can use named exports. So the syntax is a bit different. So export followed by curly braces, and inside those curly braces, you can give the name of your modules. So is array empty and dump logs. Let's save it. So in here, we were printing the props. So if you check the console, we've got these three print statements because we had three blog items. And if you see here, it also shows where it was printed. So it says blogcard.js file at line number 4. Now, instead of using console log, we want to use our utility method dump logs. So to import it also, there's a bit different syntax. So import followed by curly braces, say dump logs from, give a relative path to your file, which is utils. So you don't need to write .js. And now you can simply use this method. So instead of console log, just write dump logs. Let's save it. Let's check our console. And now, as you can see, we still got these three objects printed in the console. But if you check where they were printed, it's utils.js at line number 10. So now these are being printed from the utils file. Similarly, Say here you're working with array and a map method. So if this array was null or undefined, it would give you an error. So let's say null. Let's save it. And as you can see, you're getting an error. Cannot read property map of null. Similarly, if this was undefined, you would still get an error. Cannot read property map of undefined. So to avoid such issues, you have to be careful. So when you write code, you have to keep this in mind where you can get into these troubles. So before using a map, you can simply put a condition. So if your blog array is not empty, so we've got a function for that is array empty. So let's import it. So if you remember, to import, we use the import statement followed by curly braces, followed by the module name which we want to import from the relative path. So /utils. So we can simply use it here, say is array empty, and we can pass our array here, blog array. So now this piece of code will return true or false. If this is true, then we can simply return an empty array. And if this is false, we can execute this piece of code. So we run the map function and we generate our component list. Let's save it. And as you can see, nothing is being printed on the screen. So that means the control flow is going here and this array empty is returning true. So let's check the condition. So if these conditions are true, that means our array is not empty and we need to return false. And if any of those conditions fails, then we return true. So coming back to the browser, and as you can see, everything's working fine. Now, if I remove these array items and we just write null, so we don't get an error and it is handled by our code. So that's how you can use named exports. Now, one thing to remember, when you're working with named exports, you cannot change the name. So you cannot be like check array is empty. Let's refactor our code. Let's save it. And now, as you can see, attempted import error. So check array is empty is not exported from .utils. So you have to use this exact same name. But if you really want to use it with a different name, there is a way. So you can do import is array empty as, then you can use whatever name you like. So let's save it. And as you can see, code's working fine. Now you can name it to anything else. Say, is my array empty? A terrible name for a function, but okay. Let's refactor our code. Let's save it. And as you can see, our code still works fine. So coming back to our utils.js file, now there's another way to export your module. So instead of writing everything at the end of the file, you can add the export statement here. So export space followed by your module, export space followed by a module. So if I save my file, everything still works fine. So it just means this is a named export and this is also a named export. So you cannot do export space default. It gives you an error. So this syntax works only for named exports. And that's all for today. I hope this gave you a better understanding of importing and exporting modules. But if you have any doubts or queries, feel free to drop a comment below or reach out to me on Twitter. I'll add my Twitter handle in the description below. See you in the next video. Bye and take care.